I was fired by the new CEO on a Friday afternoon, right when I was holding the multi-million-dollar future of the entire company in my hands, and he had no idea that I was the only person keeping our overseas partnerships alive. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below, and hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to watch an arrogant, incompetent person get a brutal reality check. My name is Stella. I am 33 years old, and for the past 8 years I have served as the vice president of Apac operations for a major manufacturing firm headquartered in a sleek glass-walled skyscraper in Seattle. It was a freezing Friday afternoon, the kind where the rain lashed hard against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliot Bay, matching the intense pressure inside my office, on my dual monitors. I was rapidly coordinating the final logistical hurdles for a massive $500 million manufacturing merger with our primary Asian suppliers, a complex web of international shipping schedules, compliance protocols, and high-stakes negotiations that I had personally spent the last 6 months untangling. My phone buzzed incessantly with urgent messages from Shenzhen, Tokyo, and Seoul, all demanding immediate confirmation. I had just raised my coffee mug to take a sip when the heavy mahogany door of my office swung open with a violent crash. It was Trent, my older brother, and the newly appointed chief executive officer standing in the doorway with a smug, self-satisfied grin plastered across his face. Trent was 35 years old, blessed with a freshly printed MBA from an expensive university and an ego the size of Mount Rainier. But he possessed precisely zero practical corporate experience outside of a brief stint managing a failing golf merchandise startup funded entirely by our father. Without a single word of greeting, he marched across the plush carpet, stopping directly in front of my desk, and slammed a thick, cold manila folder down right on top of my open merger spreadsheets. The sudden impact made my coffee cup rattle against its saucer. I blinked, looking up from my screens, my mind momentarily blank as I tried to process his intrusion into my high-pressure workflow. Trent crossed his arms over his custom-tailored designer suit jacket, looking down at me with an expression of supreme condescension, as if he were a school principal about to reprimand a misbehaving student. Effective immediately, your position as vice president of Apac operations is being entirely restructured, Trent announced, his voice echoing with practiced corporate arrogance, and by restructured I mean you are officially fired. The words hung in the chilling air of the office, completely disconnected from reality for a terrifying second. My breath caught in my throat, and a sharp metallic taste flooded my mouth as the sheer magnitude of his words slammed into my brain. Fired, I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper as I stared at the manila folder bearing the Human Resources logo. On a Friday afternoon in the middle of a $500 million merger, with 100 international partners waiting on my word. You heard me, Stella Trent snapped, rolling his eyes as though my confusion were an unbearable personal inconvenience to him. So we are streamlining operations, cutting the fat, and modernizing the executive suite. My new management team reviewed your division, and quite frankly, we don't need dead weight clinging to the payroll anymore. I stared at him, my analytical mind, desperately trying to find any shred of logic in his insane statement. Dead. I had single-handedly brought in every major overseas supplier, negotiated our lowest cost margins in a decade, and prevented 3 separate catastrophic supply chain failures over the past 2 years alone. Every single dollar of profit this company boasted about came directly through the networks I had built from scratch. Through years of relentless 60-hour work weeks, missed holidays, and endless international flights. But looking at Trent's completely blank, uncomprehending eyes, I realized he didn't care about facts, metrics, or reality. He cared about power, about exerting his new title, and about proving to our doing father that he was the undisputed king of the corporate castle. The physical sensation of betrayal hit me like a physical blow to my chest, stealing the air from my lungs and sending a sharp wave of nausea rolling through my stomach. The silence in the room stretched out heavy and suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the glass and the muffled ringing of my desk phone as another overseas partner tried desperately to reach me. Trent reached down, tapping his manicured index finger aggressively against the manila folder, containing the termination paperwork he expected me to sign without a fight. "Don't sit there looking at me like I've committed a crime, Stella," he sneered, leaning over my desk and invading my personal space. The board agreed with me. Dad agreed with me. We are bringing in a fresh, dynamic vision for this company, and that vision simply does not include an overpaid, glorified translator who thinks she runs the world just because she can chat in Mandarin. I felt my jaw tighten so hard my teeth. A sudden surge of cold fury, instantly replacing the shock and devastation that had threatened to overwhelm me just moments before. He called me a glorified translator. That single ignorant insult laid bare the absolute depth of his staggering stupidity. He genuinely believed my entire job consisted of repeating English sentences into another language, completely oblivious to the intricate web of cultural dynamics, deep-rooted business relationships, and absolute trust, known as guanxi, that governed every single transaction across the Asian markets. He had no earthly idea that the suppliers in Shenzhen didn't do business with our corporate entity. They did business exclusively with me, because of me, and through me. If I walked out that door, the bridge connecting this company to every single overseas partner didn't just crack, it would instantly vaporize into dust. Trent stood there, waiting for me to beg, waiting for me to cry, waiting for me to panic and grovel at his feet for my livelihood, expecting the pathetic submission he was so accustomed to extracting from me throughout our entire lives. But I had spent 8 years surviving the most cutthroat corporate boardrooms in the world, and I wasn't about to break down in front of a petulant, unqualified boy playing CEO. I slowly leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, keeping my breathing perfectly steady and my facial expression completely neutral, masking the raging storm of calculations spinning inside my head. The phone on my desk continued to ring its flashing light, a silent witness to the impending catastrophe that Trent was walking blindly into. I looked down at the severance package, then back up at my brother, feeling a grim, dark sense of satisfaction wash over me as I realized the exquisite poetic justice of what was about to unfold on Monday morning. Trent shifted uncomfortably under my icy, unwavering gaze, his confident smirk faltering just a fraction as my lack of emotional destruction failed to provide the ego boost he was clearly craving. "Well, are you going to sign the paperwork? Or do I need security to come and physically escort you out of the building?" he demanded, his voice rising in an octave of defensive irritation. I placed my hands flat on the desk, interlaced my fingers and looked straight into his eyes, letting a very faint ice-cold smile touch the corners of my lips. "Oh, I'll sign your little paper, Trent," I said smoothly, my voice completely devoid of any tremor or fear. "And I sincerely hope you enjoy your weekend, because come Monday morning, you're going to need all the miracles you can possibly get." Trent let out a short barking laugh of pure derision, completely misinterpreting my warning as a bitter, impotent threat from a disgruntled ex-employee. "Save the dramatic speeches for someone who cares." "Stella," he scoffed, snatching the folder back up to have me sign the final page. "I don't need incompetent employees holding back my company, and I certainly don't need you." I picked up my silver fountain pen, the one our grandfather had given me when I graduated at the top of my class, and signed my name at the bottom of the termination agreement with absolute unhesitating precision. I slid the document across the mahogany wood toward him, standing up slowly to tower over him for just a brief second. "Consider me gone, Trent," I said, grabbing my personal leather notebook and sliding my phone into my pocket. "I wish you the absolute best of luck on Monday. You're going to need every single ounce of it." Trent rolled his eyes, dramatically clutching the termination papers to his chest like a trophy of conquest, as he turned around and marched out of my office without a backward glance. Completely oblivious to the ticking time bomb he had just set off under his own feet, I stood alone in the quiet office for a long moment, listening to the rain fall outside, feeling a profound sense of liberation and vindication wash over me, as I prepared to watch the magnificent empire my family built crumble into absolute ruin before the heavy mahogany door could fully click shut. Trent shoved it open again. His arrogant smirk had shifted into a petty, calculated sneer, clearly unsatisfied with my calm reaction. He wanted blood. He wanted to see me break. He marched right back to my desk, leaning his perfectly manicured hands on the polished wood, invading my space a second time. "I forgot to mention the transition protocol," Trent barked, his voice dripping with condescension. "You have exactly 1 hour to surrender all your digital assets, your WeChat login credentials, and the direct contact files for the Shenzhen executives. My new vice president of operations is moving into this office on Monday morning, and I want it completely sanitized of your presence." I looked at him, my expression a mask of absolute freezing calm. "Your new vice president?" I asked softly. Trent stood up straighter, puffing out his chest like a proud peacock. "Yes, my new vice president. A guy I went to Harvard Business School with. He actually understands modern corporate synergy, unlike you. You have been running the Asian supply chain like some outdated mom-and-pop grocery store, flying overseas every other month just to drink tea and hold hands with factory owners. It is pathetic and horribly inefficient. My team is bringing this company into the 21st century." He paced across my office, gesturing wildly toward the massive monitors on the desk. "We do not need you flying to China to play translator anymore, Stella. Do you have any idea how much money you waste on those business class flights? My team just purchased a premium enterprise-level artificial intelligence translation software. It processes Mandarin in real time. We can negotiate $500 million manufacturing deals through a simple video call, using an algorithm that costs a fraction of your ridiculous salary. You are completely obsolete." I simply stared at him, letting his profoundly ignorant boast hang in the quiet air of my office. Inside my mind, a clinical, almost terrifyingly sharp analysis was taking place. I was suppressing the crushing emotional devastation of being discarded by my own flesh and blood, channeling every ounce of that pain into pure, unadulterated logic. Trent was a fool, a dangerous, entitled fool, who had absolutely no concept of how Asian business relations actually functioned. He honestly believed that dealing with a manufacturing titan, like Mr. Jiang, was just a matter of plugging English words into a machine and waiting for a translated response. He knew absolutely nothing about Guanxi. He did not know that Guanxi was the invisible, unbreakable currency of respect, trust, and mutual obligation that powered every single major business deal in China. Mr. Jiang did not sign contracts with a corporate logo or an artificial intelligence program. He signed contracts with me. I had spent 8 grueling years cultivating that relationship. I had spent sleepless nights helping Mr. Jiang secure emergency shipping routes when the global supply chain collapsed 5 years ago. I knew his wife's name. I knew which specific vintage of baijiu he preferred during celebratory dinners. I knew the subtle, unspoken rules of Meionzi, the concept of saving face, which dictated that you never disrespect a senior partner by pushing them off to an unproven junior executive. If Trent threw a fresh Harvard graduate and a translation app at a fiercely traditional 60-year-old billionaire like Mr. Jiang, it would not just be a failure. It would be perceived as a catastrophic, unforgivable insult. "You really think an algorithm is going to close the Jiang merger on Monday?" I asked, keeping my tone deceptively mild, watching him with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a doomed experiment. "I know it will," Trent sneered, adjusting his silk tie. "Because business is just numbers, Stella. It is profit margins and supply logistics. You overcomplicate everything with your emotional attachments and your desperate need to feel important. The board sees it. Dad sees it. We all know you have been milking this position for years just to feel like you are on my level. But you are not. You are just an overpaid assistant who happened to learn a second language." The sheer toxicity of his words was meant to gut me, to trigger the familiar scapegoat response I had been conditioned to exhibit since childhood. Growing up, Trent was the golden child who could do no wrong. Whenever he failed, my father swooped in with a checkbook to clean up the mess. Whenever I succeeded, my achievements were immediately minimized, categorized as lucky or merely adequate. My 80-hour work weeks, my stress-induced migraines, my total sacrifice of a personal life to keep our family company afloat. All of it was reduced to nothing in the face of his unearned ego, but I refused to play the victim anymore. I reached into my desk drawer, pulled out a stack of empty USB drives, and placed them neatly on the desk. The company's servers hold the basic supply manifests and the official contract drafts, I said smoothly, standing up to meet his arrogant gaze. However, the direct WeChat accounts, the private mobile numbers for the Shenzhen executives, and the personal communication logs are tied to my private devices. They are my intellectual property built on my personal time, entirely separate from the corporate network. You fired me effectively immediately, which means I have no legal obligation to surrender my personal network to you. Trent's face immediately flushed a dark, angry red. He slammed his hand flat against my desk. You work for this family, Stella. Everything you have belongs to this company. You will hand over those contacts right now, or I will have legal destroy you. Your legal department can try, I replied, grabbing my coat and my leather handbag. But considering you just proudly handed me a generic severance package that legally severs my ties to this corporation without a proper handover clause, I suggest you ask your Harvard buddies how to use their search engine to find Mr. Jen's phone number. Trent gap-headed me, his mouth opening and closing as the first tiny fraction of reality began to crack through his bulletproof arrogance. He tried to formulate a command, a threat, anything to assert his dominance, but he was completely out of his depth. I am leaving now, I stated, walking around the desk and stepping right past him. Your new vice president can have the office. I am sure his translation app will look fantastic sitting on this desk, while the Asian supply chain burns to the ground. I did not wait for his response. I walked out of the office, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor of the executive corridor. But before I left the building completely, I knew I had to make one final phone call. I pulled out my phone and dialed the only person who had the power to stop this madness, knowing full well he wouldn't. I dialed our father. The line rang 3 times before his familiar gruff voice answered the call. The faint clinking of crystal glasses and muted conversations of his private country club echoed behind him. Harrison was 62 years old. He was a man who had built his corporate empire on relentless ambition and a highly specific, archaic view of how the world should operate. I had spent my entire adult life trying to prove my worth to him. I pulled countless all-nighters and sacrificed my weekends, all to earn a fraction of the pride he freely gave my brother for simply existing. Dad, I said, keeping my voice incredibly steady to mask the hurricane of betrayal currently tearing through my chest. Trent just walked into my office and handed me a termination notice. He is firing me on the eve of the Zhong merger. I need you to step in and stop this immediately before he tanks a $500 million deal. I waited for the shock. I waited for the immediate booming command for Trent to get on the line. I waited for the sudden realization that his inexperienced son was about to detonate a nuclear bomb under the corporate foundation. Instead, I heard the gentle clinking of ice against crystal as Harrison took a leisurely sip of his expensive scotch. Stella, I know you are upset right now. He began employing that patronizing, calm tone he always used when treating my professional concerns like childish tantrums, but we discussed this leadership transition weeks ago. Trent is the chief executive officer now. He has a very specific vision for modernization, and frankly, your persistent refusal to integrate into his new corporate structure left him with absolutely no other choice but to let you go today. My feet stopped moving entirely. I stood frozen in the middle of the polished marble lobby, completely oblivious to the junior associates rushing past me to beat the weekend traffic. He did not offer integration. Dad, I fired back, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned stark white. He offered me a humiliating demotion. He brought in a guy from his college fraternity to take my title and expected me to stay on as a glorified assistant to hand over my 8 years of painstakingly cultivated international relationships. You know, Mr. Zhang, you know the delicate Asian market better than anyone. You know they will absolutely pull out of the merger if Trent throws a basic translation application and an unproven junior executive at them on Monday morning. Harrison let out a heavy, exaggerated sigh, the kind of dramatic breath that was specifically designed to make me feel small, irrational, and overly emotional. "You are being completely dramatic, Stella," he said smoothly. "Trent has an Ivy League education and a brilliant team of forward-thinking strategists backing him up. The global market is constantly evolving. We do not need you flying across the globe to coddle international suppliers anymore. Trent is establishing dominance early on. High is showing them that our company dictates the terms. A leader needs obedience. Stella, not a daughter who always tries to outshine her brother." The words hit me with the devastating force of a physical blow, instantly knocking the remaining breath from my lungs. A daughter who always tries to outshine her brother. There it was at last, the ugly, unvarnished truth, stripped of all its fancy corporate jargon and polite family excuses. It was never actually about operational efficiency. It was never about modernizing the global supply chain or integrating artificial intelligence. It was entirely about ego, pure and simple. For 8 exhausting years, I had generated record-breaking revenue, single-handedly salvaging crucial partnerships that Harrison's own outdated negotiation tactics had nearly ruined. I had learned a notoriously difficult language, immersed myself in a completely different cultural dynamic, and essentially became the indispensable bridge keeping our company highly relevant in a fiercely competitive global market. But absolutely none of that mattered. It would never matter, because every single time I succeeded, every single time my name was praised by the board, it cast a huge shadow over Trent. And in Harrison's archaic, deeply sexist worldview, the golden sun could never be eclipsed by the daughter. My blood, sweat, and tears were never going to be enough to overcome the deep-rooted sexism and blatant favoritism that infected my family's DNA. I could double the company's profit margins, secure a billion-dollar merger, and work myself into an early grave, but I would always just be the difficult daughter who needed to learn her proper place behind the chosen male heir. Harrison genuinely did not care if the company suffered a temporary financial setback, as long as Trent was seated on the corporate throne, completely unchallenged and unquestioned by anyone. I stood in the lobby, the cold marble seeping into the soles of my shoes, and felt a profound, chilling clarity wash over me. The invisible chains of obligation and familial loyalty that had bound me to this highly toxic dynamic for over 3 decades suddenly shattered. I had spent my entire life starving for validation from a man who viewed my professional competence as a direct insult to his son. "Dad," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerously calm pitch that finally made the background noise on his end go perfectly quiet. "Do you honestly believe Trent can close the John contract without me?" "Hi, is the CEO," Harrison replied stubbornly, though a tiny fraction of doubt finally crept into his arrogant tone. "He will handle it. You need to accept that your role in this company has concluded. Take your severance package, take a long vacation, and let your brother lead. Do not make this a messy family issue, Stella. Be a good sister for once." A good sister, the ultimate scapegoat title. I hung up the phone without saying another single word to him, absolutely done fighting for respect from him. I lowered the phone from my ear and slid it deep into my coat pocket. I had just ended the call without another word, and in that precise moment, a profound icy calm replaced the burning resentment in my chest. I was entirely finished seeking validation from a father who would happily sacrifice my career on the altar of my brother's ego. However, I was absolutely not going to leave the building without my personal files and the physical evidence of my 8 years of grueling sacrifice. When the elevator doors slid open on the top executive floor, I bypassed the whispering administrative assistants and walked directly into the human resources storage room. Grabbing a standard-issue heavy-duty cardboard box, I carried it back to my office. My movements precise, mechanical, and entirely devoid of the hysterical emotional breakdown my family was clearly waiting for. I had exactly 15 minutes before corporate security formally deactivated my access badge, and I was going to use every single second to erase my legacy from this ungrateful company. I started with my massive mahogany desk. I swept my personal ergonomic pens, my custom leather planners, and my private encrypted hard drives directly into the box. Next came the framed photographs decorating the bookshelves. I did not have pictures of relaxing family vacations or weekend golf trips like Trent. My frames held the literal history of my survival in this cutthroat industry. I packed the photograph of my first successful factory tour in Guangzhou, the ceremonial silk scarf gifted to me by the Tokyo Logistics president, and the delicate hand-painted tea set Mr. Zhang had personally presented to me last Lunar New Year. Each item was a physical manifestation of my blood, sweat, and relentless dedication. To Trent, they were just foreign trinkets cluttering up his new modern aesthetic. To me, they represented $500 million of locked-in loyalty that he was about to lose forever. 8 years of missed birthdays, canceled dates, and midnight conference calls were packed away into a cheap cardboard box in a matter of minutes. As I reached for my favorite travel coffee mug, Trent sauntered back into the office, flanked by our terrified-looking head of human resources, Brenda. Trent was holding a thicker, finalized stack of legal separation documents, clearly irritated that I had not fled the building in tears yet. He leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms and watching me with a smug, victorious sneer, utterly failing to mask his desperate need to see me suffer. Brenda needs you to sign the official corporate exit release. Stella Trent announced, his voice echoing loudly for the benefit of the eavesdropping staff in the corridor outside. The first paper was just the preliminary notice. This one waives your right to sue us for wrongful termination and finalizes your severance payout. Sign it, grab your little souvenirs, and let security escort you out. I do not want you lingering and depressing the rest of the floor with your attitude. I ignored his petty taunts entirely, placing my mug securely into the cardboard box before turning my attention to the thick stack of papers Brenda nervously placed on my desk. I did not rush. I did not tremble. I stood in cold, calculated silence and read every single line of the severance document, forcing Trent to stand there and wait on my timeline. As my eyes scanned the dense legal jargon, my analytical mind immediately caught the glaring structural inconsistencies. This was not a bespoke executive termination contract crafted by our high-priced corporate lawyers. Trent and his arrogant rush to ambush me and assert his new dominance on a Friday afternoon had clearly downloaded a generic boilerplate separation agreement from the internet. The margins were off, the clauses were incredibly broad, and the non-solicitation terminology looked shockingly weak. I kept my face perfectly neutral, not allowing even a flicker of realization to show in my eyes. I pulled my silver fountain pen from my pocket and signed my name on the dotted line, with a smooth, decisive flourish, pressing hard enough to leave a permanent indent on the wood underneath. I handed the clipboard back to Brenda, who looked at me with deep, silent sympathy. Trent immediately snatched the papers from her hands, holding them up to the light as if he had just conquered a small nation. "Excellent," Trent gloated, stepping aside and gesturing toward the hallway with mock politeness. "Now, if you are finished hoarding your office supplies, it is time for you to leave. Do not try to contact the Shenzhen partners to say goodbye. By the way, I have already drafted a company-wide email explaining that you have decided to pursue other opportunities, and my new vice president will be handling all international communications effective immediately." I picked up my cardboard box. It was shockingly light for something that contained the entirety of my professional life, but I felt an overwhelming sense of liberation radiating through my chest. I walked past Trent, the scent of his expensive, overwhelming cologne, mixing with the smell of my own adrenaline. I navigated the long executive corridor, my heels clicking rhythmically against the floorboards, completely ignoring the wide-eyed stares of the junior executives who were peeking out from their cubicles. Trent followed closely behind me, acting as a self-appointed security guard, practically vibrating with the thrill of throwing his own sister out of the building. I reached the glass double doors that led to the main elevator bank. I pressed the call button, watching the digital numbers light up as the car ascended to our floor. The entire floor was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop as dozens of employees waited to see if I would finally crack, if I would turn around and beg for my job, or if I would scream in anger. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. The stainless steel doors slid open, revealing an empty car. I stepped inside, turned around, and placed my cardboard box on the floor at my feet. I looked directly at Trent, who was standing on the other side of the threshold, a massive, arrogant grin plastered across his face. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully eliminated his only real competition. He genuinely believed that a fancy business degree and a translation application were going to substitute for nearly a decade of earned respect and cultural integration. I let a chilling, razor-sharp half-smile form on my lips. I looked him dead in the eye, stripping away any remaining trace of sibling affection or professional courtesy. "I wish you good luck on Monday, Trent," I said, my voice echoing clearly into the silent hallway. Trent laughed out loud, a harsh, dismissive sound that bounced off the glass walls. "Yeah, right. Go home, Stella." The elevator doors began to close, slicing through his laughter and severing my ties to the toxic family empire once and for all. As the stainless steel sealed shut and the car began its rapid descent to the ground floor, I stood perfectly still in the quiet humming space. Trent was entirely unaware that he had just initiated the company's absolute self-destruction, and I was going to secure a front-row seat to watch the entire arrogant institution burn to the ground. 24 hours later, the adrenaline of Friday afternoon had completely faded, leaving behind the stark, quiet reality of my Saturday evening. I was sitting cross-legged on the velvet sofa in my downtown apartment, a glass of reasonably priced Cabernet resting on the coffee table. For the first time in 8 years, my phone was not vibrating with frantic logistical queries from shipping foremen in Guangdong or desperate emails from our legal team. The silence in my apartment was deafening, almost physical in its weight. Typically, I would be suffering through the mandatory weekly family dinner at my father's sprawling suburban estate in Mercer Island, forcing a polite smile while Harrison held court over catered food and suffocating expectations. Tonight, however, I was officially excised from the family narrative. I took a slow sip of my wine, savoring the absolute peace, when my cell phone screen suddenly illuminated the darkened room. It was a rapid-fire series of text messages from my younger sister, Nora. Nora was 31 years old, a brilliant gallery curator who survived our family by maintaining a polite, heavily guarded distance. I unlocked my screen and opened her message thread. The very first text was a photograph taken covertly from under the edge of Harrison's custom dining table. It showed Trent standing at the head of the room, wearing a ridiculous velvet smoking jacket, holding a crystal tumbler of Harrison's most expensive reserve bourbon high in the air. The caption underneath Nora's photo read, "To the new era of efficiency to cutting out the corporate cancer." End quote. "You are missing a truly nauseating performance, Stella." I stared at the glowing letters on my phone, feeling a bizarre mixture of total disgust and profound vindication. Corporate cancer. That was the new label Trent had slapped on my 8 years of grueling, relentless dedication. I typed back quickly, asking Nora for the full play-by-play. Her replies came flooding in, painting a vivid, sickening picture of the golden celebration happening miles away. According to Nora, the entire evening was a masterclass in delusion. Trent was pacing around the dining room, heavily intoxicated by his own unearned power, regaling our extended family with a completely fabricated version of Friday's events. He was framing it as a bold, necessary surgical strike to save the company's profit margins. Nora texted me that Harrison was practically glowing with pride. He raised his own glass of bourbon, loudly praising Trent in front of everyone for finally demonstrating the ruthless corporate instinct required to lead an international empire. "Harrison actually just said that you were too emotional to handle the new artificial intelligence pivot," Nora wrote, her text bubbles popping up in rapid succession. "He told our uncle that you cried and begged to keep your title, but Trent stood his ground like a true leader." I let out a harsh, bitter laugh that echoed through my empty apartment. Cried and begged. They could not even grant me the dignity of my actual cold, calculated departure. They had to invent a pathetic, hysterical breakdown because that was the only version of me that fit their deeply ingrained sexist narrative. A capable woman walking away from their abuse did not make sense in Harrison's world. Therefore, She had to be reduced to a weeping, fragile girl who simply could not handle the pressure of modern business. The text continued, and the narrative grew even more twisted. Now that I was physically absent, unable to defend my record, the family completely unraveled my history. Nora described how Trent casually mentioned that my frequent trips to Asia were essentially paid vacations. He claimed I spent my time shopping in Tokyo and attending lavish dinners in Shenzhen, while he and his new Harvard friends were back in Seattle, doing the actual heavy lifting. The extended family eagerly swallowed the lies. They nodded sympathetically, murmuring about how difficult it must have been for Trent to carry my dead weight for so long. "They are openly mocking you," Stellanora texted, adding an angry face emoji. "My aunt just said, it was a shame you insisted on coasting on the family name instead of building your own skills." I read that specific message 3 times, letting the sheer blinding audacity of it wash over me. Coasting on the family name. I was the only person who actually spoke a second language. I was the only person who understood the intricate customs required to navigate our supply chain. I had literally built my own highly specialized skill set, precisely because the family name was completely useless in the overseas markets I conquered for them. Objective facts and documented history meant absolutely nothing when they threatened the established hierarchy. I was the designated scapegoat, and Trent was the designated golden child. When the golden child failed, the system would bend reality until it looked like a success. When the scapegoat succeeded, the system would rewrite history until the success belonged to someone else. Sitting in my quiet apartment, looking at the digital evidence of my family, gleefully assassinating my character, I felt an overwhelming, profound sense of release. Let them spin their pathetic, fabricated tales of my incompetence. Let them enjoy their fragile, manufactured victory tonight. I knew exactly what was waiting for them on Monday morning, and no amount of rewritten history was going to stop the financial avalanche Trent had just triggered. Nora sent one final message before the screen went dark. "Jamal cannot take another second of this garbage. We are leaving right now. Do not move. We are coming to your place." I smiled a genuine, relaxed smile and typed back a single confirmation. I locked my phone. The dark chapter of my role as the family scapegoat officially closed forever. Less than 20 minutes after I locked my phone, a sharp, authoritative knock echoed through my apartment. I had not bothered to turn on the overhead lights. The only illumination in my living room came from the amber glow of the street lamps, filtering through the rain-streaked windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the hardwood floor. I was still sitting exactly where I had been, the half-empty glass of Cabernet resting loosely in my hand. My mind a churning vortex of residual anger and cold calculation. I set the glass down on the coffee table and walked to the front door, pulling it open to reveal my sister Nora and her husband Jamal standing in the dimly lit hallway. Nora looked absolutely furious. Her expensive silk dress was slightly rumpled, and she was clutching her designer handbag so tightly her knuckles were white. But my attention immediately shifted to Jamal. Jamal was 34 years old, a brilliant, ruthlessly effective African-American corporate attorney who specialized in high-stakes mergers and acquisitions for a rival firm downtown. He possessed a commanding, immovable presence that instantly altered the gravity of any room he entered. Tonight, he was still wearing his impeccably tailored charcoal suit from a Saturday afternoon client meeting. His tie loosened just a fraction, his dark eyes sweeping over me with a razor-sharp, analytical intensity. He did not look like a brother-in-law arriving to offer familial comfort. He looked like a predator who had just caught the scent of blood in the water. Nora pushed past me into the apartment, kicking off her heels with a frustrated sigh. "I am so sorry we left you alone with your thoughts for so long, Stella," she said, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "But I swear to God, if we had stayed in that dining room for one more minute, Jamal was going to throw Trent through the custom bay window." Jamal stepped inside and closed the door firmly behind him, shutting out the rest of the world. He locked the deadbolt with a solid metallic click. I did not say a single word. I just watched him as he walked into the dark living room, completely ignoring the comfortable armchairs. He stood right in the center of the room, radiating a cold, focused energy. "I appreciate the restraint, Jamal," I said softly, leaning against the kitchen counter. "But you really did not have to ruin your Saturday evening for me. I am perfectly fine. I am just sitting here enjoying the profound silence of being entirely unemployed." Jamal did not offer a polite smile. He did not offer any empty, hollow sympathy or platitudes about how everything happens for a reason. He bypassed the emotional family drama entirely and immediately shifted into the cutthroat legal mindset that made him one of the most feared litigators in the city. "We did not ruin our evening," Stella Jamal said, his deep voice slicing through the quiet gloom of the apartment. "Trent ruined it." The second he opened his mouth and started bragging about executing a hostile corporate restructuring without consulting a single legal advisor outside of his frat house group chat. Nora told me what he said. She told me how Harrison validated it. "It was completely disgusting. But frankly, I do not care about your father's toxic ego right now. I care about your immediate legal exposure and your strategy for survival." Nora walked over to the kitchen island and poured herself a glass of water, her hands still trembling slightly. "You should have seen him, Stella," she interjected, looking at me with a mixture of awe and residual anger. "Trent was in the middle of a toast, literally bragging about how he outsmarted you. And Jamal just stood up. He did not shout. He just placed his napkin on the table, looked Trent dead in the eye, and told him that arrogance was a very poor substitute for intelligence. Then he took my hand, and we walked right out the front door, while Harrison was screaming at us to sit back down. It was magnificent." I looked at Jamal, feeling a sudden immense surge of gratitude for this man who refused to play by my family's twisted rules. "Thank you," I said, meaning it from the absolute bottom of my heart. "Save the gratitude for when we actually win," Jamal replied, taking a few steps closer to me. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, transforming from a supportive family member into my aggressive legal counsel. "Right now, you are sitting in the dark, nursing a glass of wine, when you should be preparing for a massive corporate war. I know you, Stella. I know you spent the last 8 years building an ironclad supply chain infrastructure that this company relies on to survive. If Trent actually fired you on a Friday afternoon right before the Jang merger, he did not just make a family mistake. He made a catastrophic legal and financial error." I took a deep breath, the sheer reality of the situation finally beginning to crystallize under Jamal's intense scrutiny. "He handed me a generic separation agreement," I explained, keeping my tone as clinical and detached as his. "He brought human resources into my office, but the paperwork was incredibly sloppy. It looked like a standard boilerplate template he pulled off the internet just to rush the termination process and assert his dominance before the weekend." Jamal's eyes darkened, a dangerous, calculating gleam appearing in them. A boilerplate template for an executive vice president, holding the keys to a $500 million international merger. He let out a low, humorless chuckle that sounded more like a threat than a sign of amusement. "Trent is an absolute idiot. He is playing corporate checkers while the rest of the world is playing chess." Jamal flipped the switch, flooding my living room with bright, unforgiving light. "I needed to see that termination paperwork right now." "Stella," he demanded coldly. I walked over to the kitchen island, reached into my leather handbag, and pulled out the crumpled manila folder containing the termination paperwork. I slid it across the cold granite countertop toward Jamal. He took it without a single word. The polite, supportive brother-in-law was entirely gone, replaced by the shark-like litigator who routinely dismantled multi-million-dollar corporations in federal court. He pulled out the heavy mahogany stool, sat down at the island, and smoothed the wrinkled pages flat under the bright pendant lights. The silence in the apartment became absolute and suffocating. Nora moved quietly to the opposite side of the counter, wrapping both hands around her glass of water, watching her husband work. I stood perfectly still, my arms crossed over my chest, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. I knew the contract was sloppy. I had seen the mismatched fonts and the overly broad indemnification clauses during my brief scan in the office, but I was not a corporate attorney. I needed Jamal to translate my brother's arrogance into a tangible legal reality. Jamal pulled a silver pen from his inside jacket pocket and began to dissect the document page by page, line by line. His dark eyes scanned the dense blocks of text with terrifying speed and precision. Every few seconds, the crisp, sharp sound of turning paper echoed through the quiet kitchen. He did not speak. His face remained a completely unreadable mask of intense concentration. I watched his pen hover over a paragraph, circle a specific phrase, and then move rapidly down the page. The tension in the room coiled tighter and tighter with every passing minute. It felt like we were standing on the edge of a massive cliff, waiting to see if the ground was going to crumble beneath our feet, or if we were about to jump and fly. Page 1 was finished. Page 2. Page 3. He paused at the fourth page, his pen hovering completely still over a thick block of text near the bottom margin. His brow furrowed deeply. He leaned closer to the paper, his eyes narrowing as he read the paragraph a second time, and then a third time. I felt a cold spike of adrenaline hit my stomach. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Did he lock me out of my severance pay?" Jamal did not answer immediately. He slowly lowered his pen to the granite counter. He stared blindly at the kitchen cabinets for a long, agonizing second, his mind clearly racing through 1,000 different legal permutations. And then the absolute last thing I expected happened. Jamal burst into laughter. It was not a polite, restrained chuckle. It was a massive, booming, chest-deep roar of genuine amusement that shattered the suffocating tension in the room. He leaned back in his stool, covering his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking with uncontrollable laughter. Nora jumped, splashing water over the rim of her glass, staring at her husband as if he had completely lost his mind. "Jamal, what is so funny?" Nora demanded, setting her glass down loudly. "My sister just lost her career, and you are laughing like we are at a comedy club." Jamal took a deep, gasping breath, trying to compose himself, but a massive, triumphant grin remained plastered across his face. He shook his head, wiping a tear of mirth from the corner of his eye. "I am not laughing at Stella, Nora," he said, his voice thick with sheer disbelief. "I am laughing at Trent. I am laughing at the absolute staggering, monumental scale of your brother's complete incompetence." He grabbed the contract, spun it around on the counter, and pushed it toward me. He tapped his index finger aggressively against the fourth page. "Stella, when an executive at your level leaves a Fortune 500 company, the separation agreement is typically 40 pages long," Jamal explained, his eyes practically burning with predatory excitement. "It is meticulously drafted by a team of highly paid lawyers to ensure you cannot breathe a word of corporate strategy to a competitor for at least 5 years. But Trent did not go to the legal department today, did he?" I shook my head slowly, staring at the paper. "No," I replied. "He ambushed me at 4 on a Friday. If he had gone to legal, they would have told him to wait until Monday morning so they could prepare the proper transition documents and brief the board. He wanted the immediate power trip. He wanted to humiliate me right then and there." "Exactly," Jamal stated, slamming his hand flat on the counter. "He wanted the instant gratification of playing the ruthless boss. So instead of consulting his own legal team, your Ivy League-educated brother went onto the internet, searched for a standard employee termination template, printed it out, and forced you to sign it. This is a generic document meant for firing mid-level retail managers, not executive vice presidents of international operations." I leaned forward, reading the text he was pointing at. It looked like standard legal jargon to me. "What does that mean for me, Jamal?" "It means he just handed you the keys to the entire kingdom," Jamal said, his voice dropping into a low, deadly, serious register. "When you sign a new contract, it contains an integration clause. That clause explicitly states that this new document supersedes and entirely replaces any and all prior agreements between you and the company. Trent included an integration clause in this garbage template to make sure you could not claim any prior verbal agreements about severance pay." He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. His eyes locked onto mine. "But in his rush to void your old benefits, he completely forgot to include a new restrictive covenant. Stella, by forcing you to sign this specific document today, Trent accidentally voided your executive non-compete clause." The air rushed out of my lungs. The kitchen seemed to spin for a fraction of a second as the sheer unimaginable magnitude of his words slammed into my brain. I gripped the edge of the granite counter to steady myself. "Are you telling me I am free?" I whispered the words, tasting like pure electricity on my tongue. Jamal leaned forward, resting his forearms on the counter, his predatory grin returning in full force. "Telling you that as of 4:15 this afternoon, you are entirely legally untethered from your family's corporation. You have absolutely no geographical restrictions. You have absolutely no industry restrictions. You have no non-solicitation boundaries whatsoever." Nora gasped loudly, her hands flying up to cover her mouth as she finally realized exactly what Jamal was saying. "Oh my God," she breathed. "You are a free agent." Stella Jamal continued, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. "You own your private WeChat accounts. You own your personal phone contacts. You own 8 years of established trust loyalty in Gwangi with the most powerful manufacturing billionaires in Asia. Your brother just fired you to stroke his own fragile ego. And in doing so, he legally gave you full permission to walk directly out the door with your entire multi-million-dollar client list." I stared down at the signed paper, the exact document that was supposed to represent my ultimate defeat, my total humiliation at the hands of my toxic family. Instead, it was my emancipation proclamation. It was the deadliest weapon I had ever held. My mind began to race, calculating the time zones, the shipping schedules, and the exact location of Mr. Zhang's delegation. The devastation I had felt earlier that afternoon evaporated entirely, replaced by a cold, calculating, and ruthless drive for total victory. Trent thought he had won the war by firing the glorified translator. He had absolutely no idea that he had just armed his greatest competitor and legally opened the gates for his own destruction. Jamal stood up from the stool, buttoning his suit jacket with a sharp, decisive motion. "Well, Stella," he said, his eyes gleaming under the kitchen lights, "I suggest you pour the rest of that wine down the sink and make a pot of black coffee. We have a lot of work to do before Monday morning." I poured the expensive Cabernet down the kitchen sink, watching the dark liquid drain, and immediately started brewing a massive pot of dark roast coffee. The rest of Saturday night, and the entirety of Sunday, dissolved into a blur of relentless, hyper-focused execution. Jamal transformed my dining room table into a makeshift war room. He had his laptop open, drafting the articles of incorporation for my brand new consulting firm, aggressively securing the LLC registration through expedited state portals. I sat across from him, my screen filled with supply chain mattresses and contact lists, extracted from my private encrypted drive. We were not building a lifeboat. We were building a warship. Jamal meticulously drafted ironclad non-disclosure agreements and fresh vendor contracts, ensuring every single legal vulnerability Trent exposed was weaponized in my favor. Nora kept the coffee flowing and ordered takeout. Her initial shock completely replaced by fierce, unwavering support. By Sunday afternoon, my consulting firm was officially a registered legal entity in the state of Washington, armed with a pristine corporate structure and 0 non-compete liabilities. It felt completely surreal. My family had spent my entire life trying to shrink me to fit into their shadow, and in less than 48 hours, I had laid the foundation for an empire that would eclipse theirs entirely. But having a legal entity was only half the battle. I needed to secure the absolute loyalty of the single most important piece on the chessboard. At exactly 8:00 on Sunday evening, which was Monday morning in Shenzhen, I picked up my cell phone and dialed the private direct line for Mr. Zhang. He was 60 years old, a seasoned manufacturing titan who commanded a massive industrial conglomerate with an iron fist and traditional values. He did not speak a single word of English, or at least that was the arrogant assumption. Trent and my father operated under for nearly a decade. The line rang twice before he answered. "Director Stella." His warm, grayly voice echoed through the speaker in perfect Mandarin. "It is a pleasure to hear from you before the official delegation arrives in Seattle." I closed my eyes, centering my breathing, knowing exactly how carefully I had to navigate this conversation. "Mr. Zhang, it is always my honor to speak with you," I replied in flawless Mandarin, maintaining the utmost respect in my tone. "I am calling to ensure your flight was comfortable and to express my deepest gratitude for the partnership we built over these past 8 years. There was a highly calibrated pause on his end. He was a master of reading between the lines, and my specific use of the past tense did not go unnoticed. "Is there an issue with the itinerary?" he asked smoothly. "No issue with your itinerary, Mr. Zhang," I answered, choosing my next words with surgical precision. "However, I felt it was my duty to personally inform you that there has been a sudden and severe shift in corporate management on our end. I will unfortunately not be present in the boardroom to welcome you this morning." A palpable silence descended over the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his brilliant strategic mind. In Asian business culture, sudden absences of key relationship managers right before a major contract signing were massive red flags, signaling instability and profound disrespect. "I see," Mr. Zhang finally replied, his voice dropping into a colder, highly formal register. "Who will be conducting the final merger negotiations?" "Trent has assumed full control as the new chief executive officer," I explained calmly. "He is eager to present his modern vision to you." Another long silence stretched across the connection. "I understand completely, Director Stella," he said. "I appreciate your deep loyalty in making this personal phone call. We will proceed to the headquarters as scheduled." We ended the call respectfully. I set my phone down, a fierce thrill of anticipation coursing through my veins. I had not broken any confidentiality clauses, and I had not insulted my family's company. I simply showed Mr. Zhang the respect of a direct warning, allowing his own cultural instincts to do the heavy lifting. Dawn broke over Seattle on Monday morning, painting the glass skyscrapers in brilliant shades of gold. The scene shifted entirely to the sprawling executive suite of my family's corporate headquarters. Trent strutted off the private elevator precisely at 8:30, looking like he had just stepped out of a luxury magazine spread. He was wearing a custom-tailored Italian suit that cost more than most employees made in a month. His hair perfectly styled, his chest puffed out with completely unearned authority. He carried himself with the swagger of a conquering king who had just successfully purged a rebellion, blissfully ignorant of the legal and operational catastrophe waiting right around the corner. He snapped his fingers at the terrified administrative assistant at the front desk. "I want the premium vintage champagne, iced and ready in the main boardroom by 9:45. Trent ordered, his voice echoing loudly across the quiet floor. "Make sure the catering team arranged the caviar exactly how I requested. We are celebrating a $500 million victory today, and I want everything absolutely flawless." The assistant nodded frantically. Scrambling to make the phone calls, Trent smiled, his smug, utterly punchable smile, adjusting his silk tie in the reflection of the glass doors. He believed that securing the largest manufacturing merger in company history was just a matter of pouring expensive alcohol and flashing a confident grin. He walked toward the boardroom, unbothered that the only person who understood the mechanics of the deal was currently sitting in a downtown apartment, armed with a fresh LLC and a newly liberated contact list. He had his translation software loaded on his tablet. He had his Ivy League friends waiting in the wings. He thought he was walking into a coronation. He had absolutely no idea he was walking directly into a massacre. Trent stood at the head of the massive mahogany boardroom table, straightening his cuffs as the catering staff hastily arranged the caviar service and silver champagne flutes. He checked his gold watch, then turned to the two men standing awkwardly by the presentation screen. One was his newly appointed vice president of operations, a smug Harvard alumni named Chad, who looked like he belonged on a luxury yacht rather than in a high-stakes manufacturing negotiation. But the real centerpiece of Trent's cost-saving revolution was standing right next to Chad. My sister looked me dead in the eye in the middle of a crowded restaurant and told me the greatest wedding gift I could ever give her was to disappear from this family forever. My mother looked away. My father nodded in agreement. So, I did exactly that. But after selling the house out from under them and canceling every single wedding vendor, what I left sitting in the middle of their empty dining room completely shattered their world. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. My name is Gwen, 33 years old, and working as a senior financial auditor in Chicago. I thought I had learned to navigate the toxic dynamics of my family, but nothing could have prepared me for the tasting dinner for my younger sister's upcoming wedding. We were sitting in a private alcove at one of the most exclusive restaurants in downtown Chicago. The table was covered in half-eaten plates of Wagyu beef, imported truffles, and empty bottles of vintage champagne. Savannah, my 29-year-old sister, was glowing with the smug satisfaction she wore so well. She had just finished a lengthy speech about the intricate details of her perfect wedding. Her fiancé Trey, a brilliant software sales director who was African American, and one of the most genuinely hardworking men I had ever met, had stepped away to take an urgent phone call from a client. He was completely blind to the financial toxicity that ran deep in my family, that left just my parents, Savannah, and me at the table. That is when the waiter approached holding a black leather folder. He bypassed my father, Thomas, who was busy swirling the last drop of a $200 wine in his glass, and placed the folder directly in front of me. I opened the folder. The total at the bottom of the receipt read $4,500. I stared at the numbers, letting the absolute absurdity of the moment sink in 4,500s for a single meal. I looked across the table at my mother, Brenda. Her perfectly highlighted hair caught the light from the crystal chandelier above us as she casually adjusted her diamond earrings. She did not even blink. "Go ahead and put your card down, Gwen," she said smoothly, taking a delicate sip of her sparkling water. "Savannah needs to save her money right now. She and Trey are finalizing their honeymoon suite in Bora Bora, and those overwater bungalows are outrageously expensive. Family helps family. You know that." I closed the leather folder and pushed it slowly toward the center of the table. "I am not paying for this," I said, keeping my voice completely level. "I came here tonight to taste the menu, not to foot the bill for a private feast that I did not even order." My father slammed his hand flat against the heavy mahogany table, making the silverware rattle loudly. "Do not start this right now, Gwen," he warned, his voice low and threatening. "You have a fantastic salary as an auditor. You have no husband, no children, and no real responsibilities. Paying for a celebration dinner is the least you can do to support your sister. No real responsibilities," I repeated, feeling the familiar cold anger pooling in my chest. "You mean, aside from the $15,000 venue deposit I paid just last month because Savannah claimed her credit cards were completely maxed out, or the florist retainer she begged me to cover 2 weeks ago because she absolutely needed imported orchids. I have funded half this wedding already while you and Mom have contributed absolutely nothing but opinions," Savannah scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically as she crossed her arms over her expensive silk blouse. "You are a financial auditor, Gwen. You literally look at spreadsheets and bank accounts all day long. You make 6 figures and do absolutely nothing with your money. It is just a dinner. Stop acting like we are bankrupting you. You are making yourself look so cheap, and it is honestly embarrassing to watch." My mother leaned forward, her voice taking on that toxic, condescending tone she had perfected over 3 decades of making me the family scapegoat. "Savannah is the bride. This is her time to shine, and you are trying to ruin it with your usual negativity. You should be honored that we even invited you to share this luxury experience. It is not our fault you are 33 and single. Do not take your bitter jealousy out on your sister, just because she is building a beautiful, successful life with a wonderful man, and you are entirely alone." I looked at the 3 of them, the people who had spent my entire life taking my money, my time, and my sanity, all while treating me like a walking automated teller machine that doubled as an emotional punching bag. Every accomplishment of mine was ignored. Ignored while every extravagant whim of Sava's was funded by my hard work and quiet sacrifices. I reached into my designer purse, but instead of pulling out my premium credit card, I pulled out my car keys. I gripped the cool metal tightly in my palm, feeling the sharp edges press against my skin. "You are absolutely right, Mom," I said calmly, rising from my chair and looking down at them. "Savannah is the bride. so the bride and her generous parents can figure out how to pay for their own imported truffles. Have a lovely evening. Savannah's face turned a violent shade of red. She shot up from her seat so fast that her elbow clipped her crystal champagne flute. The glass shattered violently against the table, sending expensive champagne pouring over the white linen tablecloth and splashing directly onto my mother's designer dress. The sharp, explosive sound of breaking glass echoed loudly through the quiet restaurant. Conversations at nearby tables stopped instantly, as dozens of affluent patrons turned their heads to stare at our private alcove. Savannah did not care about the audience. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger mere inches from my face, her chest heaving with uncontrolled rage as she glared at me. You are a miserable, bitter spinster who cannot stand to see anyone else happy. Savannah hissed her voice vibrating with malice that cut through the sudden silence of the dining room. You think just because you have a boring corporate job and some money saved up, you can control me. You think you can hold a few venue deposits over my head and suddenly play the victim? Let me make something crystal clear for you, Gwen. The only reason we even invite you to these things is because Mom and Dad feel sorry for you. But if you want to know what I really want, she leaned in closer, her eyes flashing with absolute venom. The greatest wedding gift is for you to disappear from this family forever. The words hung in the chilling air between us. The surrounding tables were completely quiet now, every patron pretending to look at their menus while hanging on to every syllable of my sister's tantrum. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with Savannah. Instead, I slowly turned my gaze to our mother. I waited for Brenda to do what any normal mother would do. I waited for her to scold Savannah for the outburst, to tell her that she had gone too far, to insist that family does not speak to family that way. But Brenda did none of those things. My mother simply reached for her cloth napkin, dabbed at the spilled champagne on her dress, and deliberately turned her head away. Refusing to look at me, she stared blankly at a painting on the far wall, completely abandoning me to Savannah's cruelty, just as she had done my entire life. I shifted my gaze to my father, the patriarch, who always demanded respect and unity. Thomas let out a heavy sigh, adjusting his suit jacket with a look of profound irritation. He did not look angry at Savannah for her vicious words. He looked angry at me for provoking her. Gwen, just stop ruining your sister's mood, he muttered, shaking his head. Savannah has been under a tremendous amount of stress planning this wedding. She does not need your attitude tonight. Just pay the bill and let us salvage what is left of this evening. You are acting incredibly immature. I stood there for a long moment. A younger version of me would have crumbled. A younger version of me would have felt the familiar hot sting of tears welling up in my eyes, desperate for their approval, desperate to apologize just to restore the peace. I would have begged them to love me, handing over my credit card while swallowing my pride, just to avoid being cast out. But standing in that upscale restaurant, looking at the three people who shared my blood but possessed none of my loyalty, I felt absolutely nothing. The emotional well had finally run dry. There was no sadness left, no rejection to fear. Savannah had just handed me the exact permission I needed to execute a plan I had been holding back on for years. They wanted me to disappear. They thought my absence would be a punishment, a tragic exile, for the lonely, unloved older sister. They had no idea that my disappearance would be the catalyst for their absolute financial ruin. I reached back into my designer purse. I did not pull out a tissue to wipe away non-existent tears. I pulled out my sleek, heavy metal premium credit card. I held it between my fingers, feeling its weight, the tangible proof of the success I had built entirely on my own, while they mocked my career choices. I placed the card down on the leather check presenter with a sharp, definitive clack that echoed over the table. The waiter, who had been hovering nervously near a pillar, hurried over to process the transaction. I did not say a word as he swiped it, handed me the receipt, and offered a sympathetic nod. I signed my name with a steady hand, leaving a generous tip for the staff who had to endure my family's disgraceful behavior. I picked up my purse and looked back at my family one last time. Savannah was already smiling, victorious, believing she had put me back in my proper place as the obedient family wallet, Brenda finally looked at me, a smug expression settling on her features now that the bill was covered. Thomas went back to his wine, satisfied that order had been restored. I looked Savannah dead in the eye. My voice was calm, devoid of any anger or malice, carrying only the chilling certainty of a promise. "Your wedding gift will be delivered exactly as requested," I said. Before any of them could respond or process the finality in my tone, I turned on my heel and walked away. I did not rush. I walked through the elegant dining room with my head held high, my posture straight, ignoring the stares of the other patrons. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the restaurant and stepped out into the crisp, cool air of the Chicago night. The city was alive with flashing lights, the roar of traffic, and the distant sound of sirens, but my mind was completely silent, focused entirely on the immediate future. I walked to the valet stand, handed over my ticket, and waited for my luxury sedan. When the attendant brought my car around, I tipped him generously, slid into the driver's seat, and closed the door, sealing myself inside the quiet sanctuary of the leather interior. I sat there in the parking lot with the engine running. I did not rest my head against the steering wheel to cry. I did not call a friend to vent about the betrayal. I did not need comfort. I needed execution. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. The screen illuminated the dark cabin of the car. I swiped past my text messages, past the family group chat that I would soon delete entirely, and bypassed my social media apps. Instead, I opened a heavily encrypted folder on my home screen. It required a facial recognition scan and a complex passcode to unlock. The app loaded, displaying a highly confidential real estate portfolio. This was my hidden empire, the secret wealth I had meticulously built and managed entirely out of sight from my greedy, entitled family. I tapped on the primary property listing, a massive, beautiful suburban estate located in a highly desirable neighborhood, the exact estate my parents currently lived in. The exact estate they believed was their lifelong home. My finger hovered over the contact button for my exclusive corporate real estate broker, preparing to set off an explosion that would burn their perfect, arrogant lives completely to the ground. I pressed the contact button, sending an encrypted message to my broker. The instructions were simple: prepare liquidation documents for the suburban estate. I will initiate an expedited cash sale tomorrow morning. I locked my phone and pulled out of the parking lot. The drive back took 40 minutes, giving me time to appreciate the silence. I felt no guilt, no anxiety, and no desire to fix the relationships I was leaving behind. Savannah demanded I disappear. I would grant her wish with surgical precision. I turned onto our street and pulled into the sprawling driveway. The property boasted a main house, manicured gardens, and a detached guest house. That guest house was my sanctuary for 6 years. I lived quietly out of their way while they lived like royalty. I parked near my spot, stepping into the cool night air. I just wanted to pack a bag and head to my downtown penthouse to begin the final phase. Before I could reach into my keys, harsh headlights washed over the driveway. My parents' luxury sport utility vehicle pulled in fast, braking sharply inches from my bumper. The heavy doors swung open. Thomas and Brenda stepped out, faces illuminated by the security lights I had installed 2 years ago. They evidently left the restaurant right after me, but they had not rushed back to offer an apology for Savannah's cruel behavior. Their aggressive posture made it clear they were here to deliver a verdict. "Gwen, stop right there!" Thomas barked, slamming his car door shut. He marched across the paved drive, loosening his silk tie. "We need to talk about your living arrangements, and we are going to do it right now." I turned around slowly, folding my arms across my chest. I watched them approach, observing their absolute lack of self-awareness. "What about my living arrangements, Dad?" I asked, my voice completely stripped of human emotion. Brenda stepped forward, taking her place beside him. She looked at the beautiful guest house standing behind me, her critical eyes sweeping over the architecture before settling back on my face. "Your behavior tonight was the final straw, Gwen. You embarrassed your sister, you embarrassed us, and you made Trey uncomfortable. We have tried to be patient with your bitter attitude, but we can no longer allow your toxic energy to ruin Savannah's bright future." My mother adjusted her designer coat, lifting her chin with that signature arrogance she wielded like a weapon. Savannah and Trey are going to move into the main house immediately after the wedding. They deeply need the space to start their life together, to build a proper family. Trey has a highly respectable position as a software sales director, and Savannah absolutely deserves a home that reflects their combined success. Therefore, your father and I have decided it is only fair that you pack up your things and move out of the guest house by the end of the month. I stared at her, genuinely marveling at the sheer audacity of her statement. You are kicking me out of the guest house so Savannah can have the entire estate, I stated softly. It is the practical choice. Brenda continued, her tone incredibly patronizing. You are 33 years old and completely single. You have no husband, no prospects, and no children on the horizon. You do not need a massive 2-story guest house. Savannah wants to convert this building into a bridal preparation suite for her bridal party. And eventually, she plans to use it as a private nursery when she and Trey have their children. You are just taking up valuable space here, Gwen. It is time for you to finally grow up, find an apartment downtown, and stop dragging this family down. The absolute delusion was breathtaking to behold. They stood on a driveway they did not own, aggressively pointing at a guest house. They did not pay for trying to kick me off a vast property that legally belonged entirely to me. They were literally trying to evict their own landlord. Thomas stepped closer, reaching into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a folded stack of thick papers and a heavy silver fountain pen. We want this transition to be perfectly clean and legal, he stated, his voice laced with the fake authority he loved to project to the world. Since you have been handling the property tax paperwork and utilities for us all these years, Savannah's lawyer drafted a formal relinquishment of residency. It states that you are voluntarily vacating the premises and surrendering any tenant claims to the guest house or the main property. We are not going to let you hold those utility bills over our heads and claim you have a legal right to stay. He shoved the legal documents and the silver pen forcefully against my chest, demanding I take them immediately. Sign the papers, Gwen. Sign them right now. You will have exactly 4 weeks to clear out every single piece of your cheap furniture and hand the keys over to your sister. If you make this difficult, I will personally have the police escort you off our property. Do you understand me? I looked down at the documents resting in my hands. I read the bold heading, demanding I surrender my rights to the estate. I read the threatening clauses, demanding I vacate the premises to make way for the golden child. I thought about the absolute devastation they were going to feel when they realized who actually owned the ground they were standing on. I looked up at Thomas and my mother Brenda. They stood tall, puffing their chests, waiting for me to break down, argue, or beg for my home. I did none of those things. I slowly uncapped the silver fountain pen. A chilling, empty smile spread slowly across my face as I looked directly into my father's incredibly demanding, arrogant eyes. I stared at the thick legal document resting in my hands. The paper felt heavy, carrying the weight of an absolute delusion that my parents had nurtured for the better part of a decade. Savannah's lawyer had apparently drafted this relinquishment of residency with complete confidence, citing Thomas and Brenda as the primary property owners. My father stood there, tapping his expensive leather shoe against the pavement, waiting for me to press the silver fountain pen to the signature line. I truly believed he held all the power. He truly believed this piece of paper meant something. As my eyes scanned the aggressive legal jargon, my mind drifted back exactly 6 years. The reality of this estate was a secret my parents had buried so deeply, they actually managed to forget the truth. 6 years ago, Thomas and Brenda experienced a catastrophic financial collapse. My father had made a series of reckless, arrogant investments, leveraging every single asset they possessed to maintain a lifestyle they could no longer afford. The banks eventually came collecting. The foreclosure was brutal, swift, and entirely public. I remember the day the eviction notices were taped to the front door of the main house. Savannah was away at college, living off student loans. My parents forced her to take while lying about their wealth. My mother spent weeks crying in her bedroom, terrified that her country club friends would discover she was completely bankrupt. I was 27 at the time, quietly climbing the corporate ladder as a financial auditor. I had lived frugally, invested aggressively, and amassed a significant portfolio entirely out of their sight. When the bank put this massive suburban estate up for auction, my parents were utterly helpless. They begged me to save their reputation. They begged me to prevent the ultimate social humiliation. So, I stepped in. I liquidated a large portion of my investments, transferred the funds, and bought the estate in cash. I had paid the astronomical legal fees, settled their outstanding debts with local vendors, and shielded them from total ruin. I saved them from absolute ruin on all legally binding municipal, state, and federal documents. I am the 100% sole owner of this property. My name is on the deed. My name is on the property tax records. My name is on the comprehensive insurance policies. Thomas and Brenda are nothing more than non-paying tenants. They do not pay rent. They do not pay for maintenance. I have subsidized their luxurious suburban fantasy for 6 solid years, yet the human mind is a fascinating mechanism. Instead of experiencing gratitude, my parents immediately rewrote history. To protect their fragile egos, they convinced themselves that my financial intervention was merely a temporary family loan. They spun a wild narrative for Savannah and their social circle, claiming they simply restructured their assets for tax purposes and put the house in my name as a formality. Over time, that lie became their absolute truth. They genuinely forgot they were living on my charity. They attended their country club dinners, hosting lavish parties on the lawn, acting as if they were still the titans of the neighborhood. They pushed me into the backyard guest house, claiming I needed privacy for my accounting work, while they reclaimed the sprawling main house as their rightful kingdom. Now looking at this ridiculous, legally void document, the irony was almost suffocating. My non-paying tenants were attempting to serve an eviction notice to their actual landlord. They wanted to force me off my own property so they could gift my land to the golden child. I slowly rolled the silver fountain pen between my fingers. The cap snapped back into place with a sharp metallic click. I held the document out, offering it back to my father. "I am not going to sign this," I said, my voice completely serene. My father's face contorted with instant rage. The veins in his neck strained against his tight collar. "You will sign it, Gwen," he demanded, stepping aggressively into my personal space. "You do not dictate the terms in this family anymore. You are a guest on this property, and your time is up." My mother crossed her arms, shaking her head with an exaggerated sigh of disappointment. "Do not make this a legal battle, Gwen. You know you cannot afford to fight your father in court. Just accept that your sister needs the space. Do not be so utterly selfish." I did not back away. I kept my chilling smile perfectly intact, absorbing their misplaced aggression. I handed the unsigned papers back to Thomas, forcing him to take them. "You misunderstand me," I said, keeping my tone light and conversational. "I am not refusing to leave. You and Savannah want me out of the guest house. You want me to disappear from the property. I completely agree with you. It is time for a major transition. I will not sign your lawyer's paperwork because it is entirely unnecessary. I will pack my belongings. I will be completely out of this guest house and off this property well before the end of the month. You and Savannah can have exactly what you deserve." Thomas and Brenda visibly relaxed, the aggressive tension leaving their shoulders. They exchanged a victorious look. They thought my refusal to sign was just a last pathetic attempt to preserve my dignity before submitting to their ultimate authority. They thought they had won. "I am glad you are finally seeing reason," my father said, adjusting his suit jacket with a smug, triumphant smirk. "Have your boxes packed by next weekend. We want to start painting the guest house before the wedding." I gave them a slow, measured nod, turned around, and walked to the front door of my guest house. I unlocked the deadbolt, stepped inside the quiet space, and firmly locked the heavy wooden door behind me. The moment the latch clicked into place, the smile dropped from my face, replaced by cold, calculated focus. I walked straight to my home office desk, dropped my purse on the floor, and opened my laptop. The screen glowed in the dark room, reflecting the absolute determination in my eyes. I opened my encrypted email client. I did not search for moving companies. I did not look for storage units. I opened a new message window and typed in the private contact address for Vanguard Acquisitions. They were a notorious aggressive cash homebuyer syndicate operating heavily in the Chicago area. In the real estate auditing world, they were infamous. They did not care about home inspections. They did not care about interior conditions, and they certainly did not care about existing occupants. They bought premium lots for straight cash, bulldozed the existing structures, and built highly profitable luxury condominiums. Their most famous business tactic was their ruthless, immediate eviction process for anyone occupying the properties they purchased. They employed specialized corporate lawyers who executed 30-day notices to quit with absolute merciless efficiency. My fingers flew across the keyboard, drafting the email with swift, professional precision. I attached the verified deed, the property tax records, and the satellite layout of the entire estate. I requested an immediate off-market cash sale. I made my terms incredibly clear. I wanted a fast closing, zero contingencies, and I authorized them to handle the removal of all current residents with extreme prejudice. I hit send, watching the progress bar complete the delivery. The destruction of my family's fabricated reality was now officially in motion. I woke up the next morning feeling a profound sense of clarity. The heavy, suffocating atmosphere that had haunted my time in the guest house was completely gone. I brewed a cup of black coffee, sat at my kitchen island, and opened my laptop to review my corporate auditing schedules for the day. My mind was sharp, entirely focused on the intricate financial structures I dismantled and analyzed for a living. I was a professional at detecting fraud, identifying anomalies, and holding greedy executives accountable. I simply had never applied those professional skills to my own blood relatives until now. At precisely 9, my phone vibrated intensely against the granite countertop. It was an automated high-priority fraud alert from my primary banking institution. I picked up the device expecting a routine security check regarding an overseas software subscription or a flagged corporate travel expense. Instead, the notification highlighted a massive pending transaction on a specific account I rarely monitored. It was the Platinum Emergency Credit Card. My eyes narrowed as I tapped the notification to view the full transaction details. I had issued that specific card to my mother 3 years ago under incredibly strict conditions. Brenda had come to me crying about a sudden spike in her blood pressure and claimed she urgently needed to see an out-of-network cardiovascular specialist. She fed me a tearful, desperate story about how her and my father's asset restructuring left them temporarily lacking liquid cash for unexpected medical copays. I gave her the card with one absolute rule. It was for health emergencies, pharmacy runs, and necessary medical deductibles only. I set the limit generously high because I never wanted my parents to panic over a genuine health crisis. Apparently, my mother considered funding her golden child's vanity to be a life-or-death medical emergency. The pending charge blaring on my screen was for exactly $8,000. The merchant listed was not a hospital. It was not a specialized clinic. The merchant was Lido Bloom, an ultra-exclusive, appointment-only bridal boutique located in the most expensive shopping district of downtown Chicago. It was the kind of boutique that required a non-refundable deposit just to walk through the front doors and try on sample gowns. I set my coffee mug down. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the theft was almost impressive. Less than 12 hours ago, my family had tried to legally evict me from my own property. Less than 12 hours ago, Savannah had screamed that her ultimate wedding gift would be my permanent disappearance. And yet, here they were merrily swiping my emergency medical credit card to purchase a designer wedding dress. They truly believed I was nothing more than a mindless, bottomless vault designed to fund their delusions of grandeur. A lesser person might have immediately called the bank to report the fraud and cancel the transaction from the comfort of their kitchen. But calling the bank would only result in a declined card. My mother would likely act confused, pretend it was a bank error, and try to manipulate her way out of the embarrassment. I did not want to give them the luxury of a quiet decline. I wanted them to feel the exact same public humiliation they had inflicted on me at the restaurant the night before. I closed my laptop and sent a brief message to my corporate team, delegating my morning audits to my junior associates. I walked to my closet, pulled out a tailored designer blazer, and slipped on my sharpest heels. If I was going to crash a luxury bridal appointment, I was going to look like the wealthy financial auditor. I actually was not the pathetic spinster sister they constantly portrayed me to be. I grabbed my car keys and walked out to my sedan. The drive downtown took 30 minutes, but my mind worked with terrifying speed the entire way. I calculated the exact timeline of their morning. Savannah and Brenda must have booked this VIP appointment months in advance. They had probably been planning to manipulate my father into paying for the dress, but after the disastrous dinner last night, they likely realized his